Montana Territory, 1885. The harsh winter winds swept across the rolling plains, rustling through the tall grasses that surrounded the modest cattle ranch nestled at the foot of the mountains. Nathaniel Voss stood on his porch, his 25-year-old frame silhouetted against the setting sun, watching as another day ended in solitude. The vast emptiness of the frontier stretched before him, a daily reminder that he was utterly alone in this unforgiving land. His ranch, the Broken Arrow, was starting to show promise after 3 years of backbreaking work. The cattle were healthy, the fences mended, and the small cabin he'd built with his own hands kept him warm through the bitter Montana winters. But something was missing, and Nathaniel knew exactly what it was: companionship. Not that he would ever admit it aloud. The frontier had taught him one lesson above all others. Attachment led to loss, and loss led to pain he couldn't bear to face again. No room for softness out here, he muttered to himself, a mantra he'd repeated since his parents' deaths from fever 2 years prior. The West takes everything you love eventually. Inside his cabin, a letter from his cousin Thomas lay open on the rough-hewn table. Thomas lived back east in Boston, surrounded by comforts Nathaniel could scarcely remember. The letter contained the usual updates about city life, but the postscript had caught Nathaniel's attention. The fellows at the club thought it would be a grand joke to send you a mail-order bride advertisement. I've enclosed it for your amusement. Can you imagine Nathaniel Voss, the confirmed bachelor with a wife? We had quite the laugh. Nathaniel crumpled the paper in his hand. The joke stung more than he cared to admit. Thomas and his fancy friends knew nothing about life on the frontier, how the silence of the plains could drive a man to madness if he let it, how the loneliness seeped into your bones like the winter chill. He tossed the crumpled advertisement into the fireplace but paused before it caught flame. Something made him retrieve it, smooth out the creases, and read it once more. Eastern women seeking Western husbands, respectable matches arranged through correspondence. Ridiculous, he said to the empty room, yet he didn't throw it away again. That night, as the coyotes howled in the distance, Nathaniel sat at his table and began a letter. He told himself it was merely to spite Thomas, to show his cousin he could play along with the joke. But deep down, in a place he refused to acknowledge, a tiny spark of hope flickered to life. 3 months later, Nathaniel stood awkwardly at the train platform in Helena, his hat clutched in his hands, his palms slick with sweat. He'd exchanged several letters with a woman named Nora Zimmer, aged 22, from Philadelphia. Each letter had revealed a sharp mind and gentle heart that increasingly intrigued him, though he maintained it was all an elaborate charade to turn Thomas's joke back on him. The train whistle pierced the air, and Nathaniel straightened his best shirt, the only one without patches. He'd shaved clean that morning, revealing a jawline that had attracted attention from local girls, not that he'd ever noticed. His dark hair was freshly cut, and his tall frame stood out among the crowd. When the train finally ground to a halt, passengers began to disembark. Nathaniel scanned the faces, looking for the woman who had described herself as of average height, with brown hair and simple tastes. His heart hammered in his chest. What had possessed him to carry this joke so far? Then he saw her. Nora Zimmer stepped onto the platform, her chestnut brown hair pinned neatly beneath a modest blue bonnet that matched her traveling dress. She was slender but not fragile, with a quiet confidence in the way she moved through the crowd. When her deep blue eyes found his, Nathaniel felt the ground shift beneath his feet. She approached with a hesitant smile. "Mr. Voss." Nathaniel nodded, suddenly unable to speak. "I'm Nora Zimmer." She extended a gloved hand. "I believe we've been corresponding." Nathaniel took her hand, acutely aware of how rough his calloused palm must feel against her fine gloves. "Miss Zimmer, welcome to Montana Territory." As he helped her collect her 2 modest trunks, guilt gnawed at him. This wasn't supposed to be real. It had started as a joke, a way to prove to Thomas that he wasn't as pathetic as his cousin believed. But standing before this very real woman, who had traveled over 1,000 miles based on his letters, the humor evaporated like morning dew under the harsh western sun. The wagon ride to the Broken Arrow was filled with awkward silence broken by stilted conversation about her journey. Nathaniel couldn't bring himself to confess the truth, that their correspondence had begun as a jest, that he had no real intention of taking a bride, that the frontier was no place for someone like her, refined and delicate. "Your ranch," Nora said as they crested the final hill, "it's beautiful." Nathaniel followed her gaze across the valley, where his modest cabin and barn stood against the backdrop of the mountains. He'd never thought of it as beautiful before, functional, necessary, his, but not beautiful. "It's not much," he said, suddenly seeing the weathered wood, the missing shingles, the crude fence posts. "Nothing like Philadelphia, I imagine." "No," she agreed, but with a smile that held no disappointment. "It's better, it's real." Something in her voice made him turn to study her face. There was no dismay in her expression, only wonder and perhaps a touch of anxiety. For the first time, it occurred to Nathaniel that Nora Zimmer might have her own reasons for leaving the comforts of the East behind. As he helped her down from the wagon, their hands meeting briefly, Nathaniel felt the weight of his deception growing heavier. She deserved to know the truth before this went any further, but looking into her hopeful blue eyes, he couldn't bring himself to speak the words that would send her away. "I'll show you to your room," he said instead. "You must be tired after your journey." "Thank you, Mr. Voss," she replied, following him into the cabin that suddenly seemed far too small and far too rustic. "Nathaniel," he corrected. "If we're to be," he couldn't finish the sentence. "Married," she supplied, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "Yes, I suppose first names would be appropriate, Nathaniel." Her name on his lips would be Nora. The thought filled him with equal parts terror and longing. What had he done? The next morning, Nathaniel rose before dawn as usual to tend to his chores. He'd spent a restless night on a bedroll by the fireplace, having given Nora his room. The weight of his deception had kept him awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person breathing under his roof. He was halfway through milking the cow when he heard the cabin door open. Nora emerged not in her traveling clothes but in a simple work dress, her hair braided and pinned up practically. She approached the barn with determination in her stride. "Good morning," she said. "What can I help with?" Nathaniel stared at her, momentarily speechless. "You don't have to work, Miss Zimmer, Nora. You must still be tired from your journey." "Nonsense," she replied, rolling up her sleeves. "I didn't come all this way to sit idle. I may not know much about ranching, but I'm a quick learner." "It's not what you're used to," he protested weakly. Something flashed in her eyes, a hint of steel beneath the gentleness. "You don't know what I'm used to, Nathaniel. Perhaps we should remedy that." Throughout the morning, Nora insisted on learning each task. She collected eggs without complaint about the chickens pecking, helped feed the livestock, and even attempted to mend a broken fence rail under Nathaniel's guidance. Her hands blistered quickly, but she never asked to stop. By midday, as they sat in the shade of the porch eating a simple meal of bread and cheese, Nathaniel found himself studying her with growing curiosity. "May I ask why you answered my advertisement?" he ventured. "A woman like you could have had her pick of suitors back east." Nora's expression clouded. "A woman like me," she echoed softly. "What exactly do you think you know about me, Nathaniel?" He faltered. "I only meant." "You're educated, well-spoken. Surely Philadelphia offered more prospects than a struggling cattle rancher in Montana Territory." She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her tin cup. "Philadelphia offered nothing but shame and whispers," she finally said. "My father died leaving substantial debts. My mother passed shortly after from grief. I was working as a seamstress in a shop owned by a man who believed his position entitled him to liberties." Nathaniel's hand tightened around his cup. "Did he hurt you?" "Not in the way you're thinking," she answered. "I left before it came to that, but my reputation was compromised by his rumors when I refused him. No respectable man in Philadelphia would have me after that." She met his eyes directly. "So you see, your advertisement wasn't just an opportunity, it was salvation." Shame washed over Nathaniel. While he'd been playing at correspondence to spite his cousin, Nora had been seeking a genuine escape from an impossible situation. The joke that had seemed harmless now felt cruel beyond measure. "Nora, there's something I need to tell you," he began, but was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. 3 riders appeared on the horizon, coming fast toward the ranch. Nathaniel recognized them immediately, the Wallace brothers from the neighboring property, notorious troublemakers who had been pressuring smaller ranchers to sell out. "Stay here," he told Nora, rising to meet the visitors, hand resting near the revolver at his hip. The Wallaces pulled up in a cloud of dust, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and mockery as they spotted Nora on the porch. "Well, well," drawled Elijah Wallace, the eldest of the 3, "rumors are true. Voss has himself a woman." His eyes traveled over Nora in a way that made Nathaniel's blood boil. "State your business and move on, Wallace," Nathaniel said coldly. "Just being neighborly," Elijah replied with a smirk. "Came to see if you'd reconsidered our offer for your water rights. Drought's coming, and that creek of yours is going to be mighty valuable." "My answer hasn't changed. The creek stays with the broken arrow." Elijah's friendly facade dropped. "Don't be a fool, Voss. You can't hope to hold this place alone. Now with a woman to protect," he glanced at Nora again. "Shame if anything were to happen while you're out mending fences miles from home." Nathaniel took a step forward, hand now resting on his revolver. "That sounds mighty close to a threat." "Take it how you want," Elijah shrugged, turning his horse. "But remember, accidents happen out here all the time. No law for miles to investigate too closely." With that, the 3 brothers rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and menace behind them. When Nathaniel turned back to the porch, Nora stood with her spine straight as a ramrod, her face pale but composed. "Who were they?" she asked quietly. "Trouble," Nathaniel answered grimly. "The Wallaces want my land, particularly the creek that runs through the north section. They've been trying to buy out all the small ranchers around here. And if you don't sell, they make it difficult to stay," he said simply. "Lost 3 head of cattle last month. Can't prove it was them, but—" Nora nodded, understanding the unspoken. "I see." She looked out toward where the riders had disappeared. "So that's why you advertised for a wife. You need help defending your claim." The perfect opening to explain the truth had presented itself, yet Nathaniel found himself hesitating. If he told her now that her presence was based on a joke, she would leave, and where would she go? Back to Philadelphia and certain disgrace, to another mail-order arrangement where she might face worse than the Wallaces. "We should finish the north fence before nightfall," he said instead, avoiding her eyes and the truth in equal measure. "I'll teach you to shoot tomorrow. Every ranch woman should know how to handle a rifle." He walked toward the barn, feeling her eyes on his back, and knowing that each step took him deeper into a deception he didn't know how to escape. Over the next 2 weeks, a strange rhythm developed at the Broken Arrow. By day, Nathaniel taught Nora the workings of the ranch, how to mend fences, tend the vegetable garden, milk the cow, and even basic riding skills. She proved a determined student, never complaining despite blisters and sunburn. By evening she transformed their meager supplies into surprisingly tasty meals, mended his clothes without being asked, and slowly added small touches to the cabin. Wildflowers in a tin can on the table, a quilt from her trunk across the back of his one chair, curtains fashioned from a dress she no longer needed. Each night Nathaniel slept by the fireplace, refusing her suggestions that they alternate who took the bed. Each morning, he woke to find she had already stoked the fire and started coffee. They existed in a careful dance of politeness, both avoiding the inevitable discussion of when they would actually marry. On the 15th day, Nathaniel returned from checking fence lines to find Nora standing in the yard, his rifle raised to her shoulder as she aimed at a row of tin cans set up on a fallen log 50 yards away. She fired, the recoil pushing her back slightly, but her stance held firm. The middle can flew off the log. "Good shot," he called as he dismounted. She lowered the rifle, a satisfied smile on her face. "I've been practicing while you're out. 3 hours each afternoon." "I can see that." He couldn't keep the admiration from his voice. "I won't be helpless if those men come back," she said simply. That evening, as they ate supper, Nathaniel finally found the courage to approach the subject they'd been avoiding. "The Reverend comes through town once a month," he said, studying his plate rather than meeting her eyes. "He'll be there this Sunday." Nora set down her fork. "Are you suggesting we marry this Sunday?" "If you're still willing." He forced himself to look at her. "I know it's not what you expected, this place, this life. If you want to wait longer or if you've changed your mind." "Have you changed yours?" she asked quietly. The question struck him like a physical blow. Had he? The answer, he realized with startling clarity, was yes, but not in the way she meant. What had begun as a joke had become something he actually wanted, and the realization terrified him. "No," he said finally. "I haven't changed my mind." That night, unable to sleep, Nathaniel stepped outside to clear his head. The moon illuminated the landscape, casting silver light across his land, his land. The thought no longer filled him with the same fierce pride. Instead, he found himself thinking of it as potentially their land, his and Nora's. A movement near the barn caught his eye. Nora stood in her nightdress and shawl, gazing up at the star-filled sky. Something about her solitary figure broke through his defenses. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, approaching slowly to avoid startling her. She turned, unsurprised by his presence. "I was thinking about Sunday," she admitted, "about becoming Mrs. Voss." "Having second thoughts?" he asked, bracing himself for her answer. "No," she looked up at him with those clear blue eyes that seemed to see right through him. "But I think you are." The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken truths. Nathaniel opened his mouth to deny it, then stopped. "She deserved better than more lies. I've been unfair to you, Nora," he said at last. "There's something you should know before Sunday." He told her everything, about Thomas's joke, about his response being meant as a counterjest, about never expecting it to go this far. As the words poured out, he watched her expression change from confusion to hurt to something he couldn't quite read. When he finished, she remained silent for so long that he thought she might simply walk away, back to the cabin to pack her things. "So none of it was real?" she finally asked, her voice steady despite the pain evident in her eyes. "All those letters, all those words about wanting companionship, about building a life together, that was just part of your game with your cousin." "At first," he admitted, unable to lie to her anymore. "But then your letters came and they were so honest, so thoughtful. I found myself looking forward to them, to knowing you. By the time you arrived, I'd almost forgotten how it started." "Almost," she repeated bitterly. "But not quite." "I was going to tell you that first day," he said. "But then I saw you, actually saw you, and I couldn't bear the thought of sending you away. Then the Wallaces came, and I told myself I was protecting you, but the truth is," he faltered, struggling to articulate feelings he'd scarcely acknowledged to himself. "The truth is what, Nathaniel?" she pressed. "The truth is I'm afraid," he confessed, the words barely audible. "The frontier takes everything eventually. My parents, neighbors, friends, all gone to disease or violence or just the hard living. I told myself it was better to be alone than to care for someone only to lose them." Nora's expression softened slightly. "So you engaged in a charade rather than risk genuine feeling." "Yes," he admitted, "and now I've hurt you, which is exactly what I was trying to avoid." She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, looking out across the moonlit land. "You're right about one thing," she said. "The frontier is harsh, but facing it alone, that's a choice, Nathaniel, a poor one in my opinion." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I came west for a new beginning, one free from the shadows of Philadelphia. I'd hoped to find it with you, but I won't build that life on a foundation of deception." She met his gaze squarely. "If you want me to stay, to marry you on Sunday, it has to be real, not out of guilt or obligation or fear of the Wallaces." "And if I don't?" he asked, though the thought of her leaving created a hollowness in his chest he couldn't explain. "Then I'll take the stage to Helena on Saturday," she answered simply. "I have enough saved for a ticket farther west. I hear California is beautiful." She turned and walked back to the cabin, leaving Nathaniel alone with the stars and the weight of a decision he'd never thought he'd have to make. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool. Nathaniel had barely slept, the conversation with Nora playing over and over in his mind. She had been quiet but civil the past few days, continuing her chores without complaint but maintaining a careful distance between them. He found her at the table, already dressed in her traveling clothes, a small bag packed beside her. "You're really leaving," he said, the reality of it hitting him like a physical blow. "Yes." She folded her hands in her lap. "The stage comes through town at noon." Nathaniel nodded, feeling hollow. "I'll take you." The wagon ride to town was conducted in silence, the space between them on the bench seeming wider than the few inches it actually was. As they approached the town, Nathaniel noticed unusual activity. Too many horses hitched outside the saloon, too many unfamiliar faces on the street. "Wait here," he told Nora as they pulled up in front of the general store. "Something's not right." Inside, he found the storekeeper, old Sam Miller, looking nervous as he stocked shelves. "What's going on, Sam?" Nathaniel asked. "Town seems busy." "Wallace boys brought in extra hands," Sam muttered, glancing toward the window. "Word is they're filing a claim on your water rights, saying the creek boundary was never properly surveyed. Got some surveyor from Helena to back them up." Cold anger settled in Nathaniel's stomach. "They can't do that. I have the deed clear as day." "Deeds get lost, surveyors get bought," Sam said grimly. "And judges get intimidated when 15 armed men show up in town." Nathaniel's mind raced. If the Wallaces succeeded in claiming the creek, the Broken Arrow would be worthless within a year. No water meant no cattle, no crops, no life. "Is Judge Parker here yet?" he asked. "Due on the noon stage," Sam replied. "Same one that'll take your lady friend away, from what I hear around town." Nathaniel's head snapped up. "How do you know about that?" Sam shrugged. "Wallace boys were in yesterday, laughing about how you'd be losing your woman and your water all in one day. Said something about making sure Judge Parker understands the situation as soon as he arrives." The implication was clear. The Wallaces would intimidate or bribe the judge before Nathaniel could present his side. And they knew about Nora leaving, which meant they'd been watching the ranch, close enough to overhear their conversation. He returned to the wagon to find Nora exactly where he'd left her, though her expression showed concern. "What's wrong?" she asked. Briefly, he explained the situation. "You should still take the stage," he concluded. "This isn't your fight." "It seems I'm involved whether I want to be or not," she replied thoughtfully. "They've been watching us, listening to us. They know we argued, no, I'm leaving." "All the more reason for you to go," Nathaniel insisted. "The Wallaces are dangerous men." Nora studied his face. "What will you do?" "Try to speak to the judge before they do," he said. "Show him my deed, explain the situation. Alone against 15 armed men." "I don't have much choice," he replied grimly. Nora's gaze traveled down the street to where several rough-looking cowboys lounged outside the saloon, watching them with undisguised interest. She seemed to come to a decision. "I'll help you," she said firmly. "Nora." "Listen to me," she interrupted. "Those men expect me to leave on the noon stage. They'll be watching for that, but what if I don't? What if instead Mrs. Nathaniel Voss makes her first appearance in town, on the arm of her new husband?" Nathaniel stared at her, uncomprehending. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we need to change their expectations," she explained. "They think we're divided, vulnerable. Let's show them we're united." "You want to pretend we're already married?" he asked incredulously. "In front of the whole town?" "Not pretend," she said quietly. "The Reverend arrived yesterday for Sunday services. He's staying at the boarding house." The implication of her words slowly dawned on him. "You want us to actually get married, now, today?" "Yes," her gaze was steady, determined. "It would give me legal standing to support your claim as your wife, and it would show the Wallaces that you're not as alone as they think." "But yesterday you were ready to leave," he protested. "You said you wouldn't build a life on deception." "And I meant it," she replied. "This isn't about deception, Nathaniel. This is about choosing to face a threat together rather than alone." She placed her hand over his on the wagon seat. I'm not offering this out of pity or obligation. I'm offering because in the weeks I've been here, I've come to care for you and for the broken arrow. I won't let the Wallaces steal either away without a fight." Nathaniel looked down at her hand on his, small but strong, the blisters from ranch work now turning to calluses. She had surprised him from the moment she stepped off that train, not the delicate Eastern flower he'd expected, but a woman of quiet strength and remarkable adaptability. "And after," he asked, "if we succeed against the Wallaces, what then?" A small smile curved her lips. "Then we decide if we want to make it real, not out of necessity or convenience, but because we choose each other." The noon stage would arrive in less than an hour. The Wallaces and their men were watching, waiting for Nathaniel to be left alone and vulnerable. Instead, they would face not just him, but Nora as well, Nora Vaughn, his wife, with all the legal and social protection that status conferred. "Let's find the Reverend," Nathaniel said. 40 minutes later, Nathaniel and Nora emerged from the small church at the edge of town, a hastily signed marriage certificate in hand. The Reverend had been surprised by their urgency, but not unwilling to perform the ceremony once Nathaniel explained the situation. Nora had changed from her traveling clothes into her best dress, a modest blue gown that brought out the color of her eyes. Nathaniel wore his Sunday suit, slightly too tight across the shoulders after years of ranch work, but respectable enough. "Ready, Mrs. Voss?" he asked, offering his arm. "Ready, Mr. Voss," she replied with a determined smile, taking it. Together they walked toward the center of town, where the stage would soon arrive. Already a crowd had gathered, townspeople, curious onlookers, and the Wallace contingent, immediately recognizable by their matching gun belts and hostile stares. As they approached, Elijah Wallace pushed away from the hitching post he'd been leaning against. "Well, look who's here," he called loudly. Voss and his mail-order bride heard she was leaving on today's stage. His eyes narrowed as he took in their formal attire. "Unless there's been a change of plans." "Indeed there has," Nathaniel replied steadily. "Allow me to introduce my wife, Mrs. Nora Voss. We were just married by Reverend Johnson." A murmur ran through the crowd. Elijah's confident smirk faltered slightly. "Congratulations," he said, the word dripping with insincerity. "Though I'm afraid your timing is unfortunate. The judge arriving today may have some bad news regarding that creek of yours." "We look forward to speaking with him," Nora interjected smoothly. "My husband has all the proper documentation regarding our property boundaries." Elijah's gaze shifted to her, surprised by her confident tone. "Property matters can be complicated, Mrs. Voss. A woman wouldn't understand the technicalities." "On the contrary," she replied coolly. "My father was a solicitor in Philadelphia before his death. I grew up reading legal documents and understanding property law. I'd be happy to review our deed with the judge personally." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Elijah's face. This wasn't the scenario he had anticipated. Before he could respond, the distant sound of the stage horn announced its approach. "That would be the judge now," Nathaniel said, "if you'll excuse us." They moved past the Wallace group toward the stage stop, feeling the hostile stares at their backs. "They won't give up that easily," Nathaniel murmured. "I know," Nora replied quietly, "but neither will we." The stage rolled into town in a cloud of dust, coming to a halt before the hotel. Among the disembarking passengers was a distinguished older man with silver hair and a stern countenance, Judge Parker, immediately recognizable by his formal Eastern clothes and the deference shown to him by the driver. Elijah Wallace moved quickly to intercept him, but Nora was faster, pulling Nathaniel forward. "Judge Parker," she called, her voice clear and cultured, "what a pleasure to see you again after all these years." Both the judge and Elijah stopped in surprise. Judge Parker peered at Nora with confusion that slowly gave way to recognition. "Miss Zimmer, Horace Zimmer's daughter," he asked incredulously. "It's Mrs. Voss now," she corrected with a warm smile, "but yes. Father always spoke so highly of you after your time together at Harvard Law." Nathaniel stared at her in astonishment. She had never mentioned knowing the judge. Judge Parker smiled broadly, taking her hands. My dear girl, what a delightful surprise. Last I heard you were in Philadelphia after your parents' passing. My deepest condolences, by the way. Your father was a fine man and an even finer legal mind. Thank you, Nora replied. May I introduce my husband, Nathaniel Voss? We were married just today. The judge shook Nathaniel's hand warmly. Congratulations to you both. Elijah Wallace stepped forward, attempting to regain control of the situation. Judge Parker, if I might have a word about an urgent property matter. All in good time, Mr. Wallace, the judge replied dismissively. I've been traveling for days and would appreciate a meal and conversation with an old colleague's daughter first. He turned back to Nora. You must join me for lunch and tell me how you came to be in this corner of the territory. We'd be delighted, Nora replied, especially as we have a property matter of our own to discuss, one that directly involves Mr. Wallace's claims. The judge raised an eyebrow. Indeed, then I shall certainly want to hear about it, shall we? He offered Nora his arm, which she took with a gracious smile, leaving Nathaniel to follow and Elijah Wallace to stare after them with barely concealed fury. Inside the hotel dining room, over a modest but welcome meal, Nora explained her connection to the judge. Her father had indeed been a solicitor who had studied with Parker years ago, while Nathaniel presented their case regarding the creek boundaries. The judge listened attentively, examining the deed Nathaniel produced. This seems entirely in order, he concluded. The boundary is clearly specified as running through the center of the creek for the entire length of your property. The Wallaces claim a new survey shows differently, Nathaniel explained. Judge Parker frowned. I'd need to see this supposed new survey. Frankly, I'm skeptical. Boundary disputes are common in these territories, but established deeds take precedence without compelling evidence to the contrary. He looked at Nora with newfound respect. Your father would be proud of you, my dear, protecting your property rights so diligently. Thank you, Judge, she replied. Father always taught me that justice requires vigilance. When they left the dining room, Elijah Wallace was waiting with a thin man clutching a leather case who was introduced as the surveyor from Helena. The judge listened to their claims with professional courtesy but growing skepticism. Your survey contradicts established documentation, he finally stated. Without evidence of fraud in the original survey, the Voss deed stands. The creek boundary remains as recorded. This matter is closed. Elijah's face darkened. This isn't over, Voss, he muttered as the judge walked away. Yes, it is, Nathaniel replied firmly. You tried to steal what's mine, what's ours, and you failed. Try again, and I'll have the territorial marshal investigate how 3 of my cattle ended up with altered brands last month. The threat hit its mark. Cattle theft was one of the few crimes consistently punished severely in the territory. Elijah's expression shifted from anger to calculation. Keep your creek, he said finally, for now, but watch your back, Voss. Both of you. With that he stalked away, his men following reluctantly. Only when they were alone did Nathaniel turn to Nora, amazement written across his features. You knew the judge. You never mentioned your father was a solicitor. You never asked, she replied simply, and I wasn't entirely certain he would remember me. I was just a child when he visited our home in Philadelphia. You saved the ranch today, Nathaniel said quietly. You saved everything. We saved it together, she corrected, and it's our ranch now, according to the law and that marriage certificate. The reality of their situation settled between them. In the space of a few hours, they had gone from preparing to part ways to being legally married. The weight of it should have felt oppressive, yet somehow it didn't. About that, Nathaniel began hesitantly. What you said earlier, about deciding whether to make it real. I meant it, she interrupted gently. We married today out of necessity, but what happens next is our choice. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street as they stood facing each other, no longer pretending, no longer hiding behind jokes or half-truths. I'd like to try, Nathaniel said finally. Not because I need help with the ranch or protection from the Wallaces, but because these weeks with you have been the first time since my parents died that I haven't felt alone." He took her hands in his, those capable hands that had already done so much for the broken arrow. "I want you to stay, Nora, as my wife for real." Her smile bloomed slowly like the first wildflowers after winter. "Then take me home, Nathaniel. We have a life to build." Autumn 1886. The first hints of gold touched the aspen trees surrounding the Broken Arrow Ranch, now expanded with a new barn and additions to the cabin that made it a proper home. Nora stood on the porch, watching as Nathaniel worked with the new colts in the corral, his movements confident and sure. The past year had brought changes neither could have imagined that day at the train station. The Wallace brothers had eventually sold their ranch and moved farther west, rumors of gold in Idaho drawing them away. Nathaniel's cousin Thomas had been shocked to receive a wedding announcement instead of the joke he expected, and even more shocked when Nathaniel and Nora visited Boston that winter, a proper married couple whose obvious affection for each other silenced any lingering laughter. The mail-order bride sent as a joke had become the heart of a thriving ranch and the center of Nathaniel's world. The man who believed the frontier left no room for love had discovered that love was precisely what the frontier needed most. Nathaniel looked up, catching sight of her on the porch. He said something to the ranch hand working with him, then made his way toward the house, his stride purposeful. "Everything all right?" he asked as he reached her, concern in his eyes. "You should be resting." Nora placed a hand on her rounded belly, now 6 months along with their first child. "I'm fine," she assured him, "just enjoying the view." His expression softened as he placed his hand over hers. "Doctor says everything looks good." "Perfect," she confirmed. "Strong heartbeat, active kicking. Our little cowboy or cowgirl is doing well." Nathaniel pressed a kiss to her forehead, then her lips. "I never thought I could have this," he admitted quietly, the confession one he'd made before but never tired of repeating. "A home, a family, you." "All because of a joke that became the greatest truth of our lives," she replied, leaning into his embrace. Together they watched the sun setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. The broken arrow wasn't broken anymore. It was whole, complete, alive with possibility. "What do you think your cousin Thomas would say if he could see us now?" Nora asked with a smile. Nathaniel laughed, the sound carrying across the land they had fought for and now shared. "He'd say he deserves credit for the best matchmaking in history." "Perhaps he does," she conceded, "though I prefer to think we found each other because we were meant to." As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the Montana sky, Nathaniel and Nora Voss entered their home together, the light from their windows a beacon in the vast wilderness. The joke that brought them together had long since faded, replaced by a love as enduring as the frontier itself. A love that had seen the cowboy's worth in his mail-order bride, and the bride's worth in the land and man she now called her own.